The Canucks have a perfect opportunity right in front of them as a much discussed trade target in the NHL gets even more buzz with a new report indicating he's still available, but what it would take for the Canucks to make it happen might be a bit upsetting for some fans to hear. We're going to be breaking down all that in this episode of Canucks Digest, but first, if you're not a part of the 41.8% of viewers who are already subscribed yet and you want to stay up to date on all things Canucks, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss any of the episodes when they drop. And with that, let's hop straight into it, which is the Zacha Opportunity. So Frank Saravelli was on Canucks Central earlier today, and they were asking him about Pavel Zacha, and he says, I think if someone stepped up, there was a bit of a typo in this tweet, and made a right offer, that he is gettable. And he was talking about all the teams that are kind of discussing and contemplating trying to get him, and potentially Vancouver might be in the mix, as this is a player that has been linked to Vancouver throughout the entire summer and a lot of other teams as well, but seemingly a very good fit in Vancouver. And this just adds even more fuel to the fire, showing that Boston will listen to offers if they get the right one sent their way. And when you look at the stats that Zacha brings, there is another center that we know that the Canucks absolutely need. And Patrik Allvin said that they are open for business as far as trying to improve at the center position. And when you look at the production that he can bring, it's not a crazy amount, but it is still really good, where you got a guy who is capable of 47 points a season ago, who has a ceiling as high as 59 points from 2 seasons ago, and bring you assists and a good plus minus rating as well from time to time throughout the course of the season if he's on the right line. So I'm not necessarily saying that you put him on a line with Petey right out the bat, but this could be exactly the second or third line center that the Canucks absolutely need, especially if Filip Hronek is not fully ready to be that number 2 center the Vancouver Canucks need. You bring Zacha in as a potential to fill in that void, or potentially some other players to bump up, as we know that with the center and market right now, and with what the Canucks have, there is going to be a lot of maybe next man up, so to speak, or telling guys, hey, you're going to have to play a lot harder than you did last year. I'm looking at Aatu Ratu, I'm looking at Filip Hronek, obviously Elias Pettersson, but with these Canucks centers, they are going to have to step up to the plate in a big way if the Canucks cannot get a deal done with trying to get a new center into Vancouver, because as was talked about on Canucks Central, it's going to be very tough for Vancouver to make a deal happen with the very limited availability of free agents that are still out there, or the potential trade market aside from Zacha, where it looks like the Canucks are going to have to look internally for that solution at center if they don't go the route of a trade, or specifically the route of Zacha in this sense. Because what is going to be a bit challenging is the fact that he does bring a contract of $4.75 million a year, and the Canucks only have 3.27 left in cap space for the moment. So they might have to move some things around and get rid of some players, obviously, to make this happen, and not just give up draft compensation for a guy like Zacha, who will be under contract for another year before the Canucks will have to kick that can down the road a bit further. But with a guy like this, if they go out and make a deal like this happen, they'll probably give him an extension right off the bat, or within his first couple games if he is really good. Or if it's the opposite, they'll be like a Daniel Sprong situation where they ship him out and then they take a loss on it, but that is going to be a very big loss to take on it. So with Vancouver not wanting to make a huge gamble, I can understand why we haven't seen them make a trade offer for Zacha yet. Because if it's a gamble that doesn't pay off, that's going to be a big bullet for Vancouver to bite, especially when you look at what they would have to give up for that. Because when you look at the depth chart here, there really is one name really in the center position that you can make an argument as to who the Vancouver Canucks would trade. Filip Hronek, they're really high on him. They're paying him a lot of money. They're not going to let him go for nothing when they just brought him in there. Aatu Ratu, another player that they're very excited about with his capability on this Vancouver Canucks team, and they got him for cheap as well. That brings us to number 53, Teddy Blueger, of course, where they're paying him $1.8 million a year. He's in the final year of a contract, and what do you know? The Vancouver Canucks, that 1.8 would get them to the point that they need to make Zacha not go over the salary cap for the Vancouver Canucks. So it does bring a bit of an interesting concept to think about, especially when looking at the draft capital that the Canucks do have. Doesn't bring a whole lot of freedom as far as what they can give up for a guy like Zacha. Maybe you give up one of those 4th round picks. You have 3 of them in 2027, so maybe you give up one of those, and maybe the 4th round pick, and maybe you give up one of the 3rd rounds. Who knows? But I think there is some decent draft value that you can kind of afford to give up for a guy like Zacha, especially if it's going at the expense of Teddy Blueger as well. because that 1.8, it can bring you down to that under four, around 5 million that the Canucks would need to bring in a guy like Zacha and stay under the cap. So I think that's something for Vancouver to really kind of consider here is, yes, you kind of have a solution there at center, and you have a guy who can bring in a lot of points in production, almost a similar type of player like Teddy Blueger in that sense. He is a bit younger and he doesn't bring a whole lot of size. He's still only 6'3", but he is a former first round pick. He is a guy that has a lot of capabilities. We know that the ceiling is pretty high considering where he could be at on this Vancouver roster, but we also see that the floor is also very low as far as what he looks like in a bad year. But again, I think on this Vancouver Canucks depth chart, he would fit in pretty nicely. You put him on that third line with Höglander and Garland. I think that brings a fairly well-balanced line there where you have some speed and finesse, and then you have a bit of a bigger body at Zacha in the center as well. And if Filip Hronek isn't able to perform at the level of a 2C like the Vancouver Canucks are hoping, that brings an opportunity where you can bump Zacha up to that second line, put him on there with Kane and Lekkerimäki. I'm not saying that these are going to be the for sure lines once Vancouver starts the season. We could see a lot of shakeup happening, even just over the course of the first 4 games. But this is just going off of the initial depth chart, going off of the preseason game and things like that. So within that, if you do have a situation where you want to move on from Teddy Blueger because he's 31 years old, final year of a contract, it's really the only one that makes sense for Vancouver because they've been hyping up Aatu Räty so much this past offseason, the past 2 years really, that it wouldn't make sense for them to move on from a guy that they're already so hyped about and they're not having to pay a lot of money for. And Filip Hronek, while they are paying him a lot of money and that would free up the most cap space, they have also been really hyping him up and been really excited with what he might be able to bring for this season. So within that, I know it sucks to say because Teddy Blueger has been a mainstay in Vancouver for quite some time, but he is a bit older. He's only 4 years older than Zacha is, so that brings a little bit more youth for Vancouver, even if it is at a bigger price tag. But it's also a player that you can bring in that has a little bit of term already added with him, rather than trying to extend Blueger and maybe overpaying for a guy like that might not have too much gas left in the tank compared to a guy like Zacha, where by the time that Vancouver would have to extend Zacha as well or give him another contract, that cap space will go up increasingly over the next couple of years or so, guaranteed, as the NHL has already announced that those changes will be coming. But what do you guys think about the idea of bringing in a guy like Pavel Zacha? Do you think that Vancouver is one of those teams that is in the market for bringing him in, like Frank Zervalli is saying, that if they send the right offer, that they are definitely going to be, he is a player that is going to be gettable? Or are you confident with sticking within this and saying, yeah, you keep Blueger even despite the fact that he's 31 and in the final year of his contract, and you see if you can do this internally rather than try and solve this problem through the route of a trade, especially when looking at the draft capital the Canucks have? How much of their future do they want to give up? And especially when, of course, the big elephant in the room with all of this is Quinn Hughes. So that's another thing Vancouver is also thinking of, where a guy like Zacha, they're going to have to pay probably almost $5 million to bring in if Boston isn't going to eat any of that contract, which they probably won't. So that's another bill that Vancouver will have to foot in a year where they're already having so much noise surrounding Quinn Hughes that it seems like if Vancouver were to make any moves, whether it's a trade, a contract extension, or anything like that, that isn't a prospect or isn't Quinn Hughes, seems like Vancouver is going to lose their absolute minds over it, because they're just going to say, you have this money that you're just spending on these other guys, spend it on Quinn now. That is definitely what the discussion will probably be on social media. Let us know what if you guys think differently about that, and if Pavel Zacha is a player you would want to see in Vancouver. But that's going to do it for this episode of Canucks Digest. Make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell icon so you don't miss the episodes when they drop. But for now, I've been your host, Griffin. Take care.